Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan returned from the United States, highlighting progress in Turkey-US ties after talks with Donald Trump. Erdoğan stressed efforts to end Israel's offensive in Gaza, calling for urgent peace and reaffirming Turkey's support for Palestinian statehood. He also warned that Israeli aggression is destabilizing the wider region while underlining Syria's sovereignty and Cyprus' two-state solution. To end the war in Gaza, U.S. President Donald Trump unveiled a 21-point plan, and at the same time, the United Nations reimposed sanctions on Iran over nuclear violations, deepening Tehran's economic and political isolation.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan spoke to journalists on his return flight from the United States to Turkey on Thursday. President Erdoğan evaluated Turkey's foreign policy engagements and recent regional and global geopolitical developments.
We were warmly welcomed by Trump and his delegation at the White House. We leave Washington satisfied. We held our meetings with Trump in a friendly, constructive, and productive atmosphere. Our relationship with Trump has been very good since the beginning. We had a different dialogue during his first term, and that continues. I believe this will have a positive impact on Turkish-American relations. Of course, it's impossible to resolve every issue in a single meeting. However, this contact has led to significant progress on many issues.
While acknowledging that not all issues can be resolved in a single meeting, the Turkish leader said the talks achieved significant progress on many issues.
Our meeting was crucial in demonstrating the will to end the massacres in Gaza. At the meeting, Trump emphasized the need to end the conflict in Gaza and achieve lasting peace. We explained how to achieve a ceasefire and then lasting peace in Gaza and throughout Palestine. Our fundamental goal is to end the massacres in Gaza as soon as possible. Security reasons cannot justify the loss of life of children, women, and innocent civilians. Let no one doubt this. We will continue to keep this issue on the agenda until a lasting and just peace is achieved in Gaza.
The Turkish president criticized Israel's military offensive in Gaza, highlighting the growing global awareness of human rights violations in Palestine.
Israel, with its oppression and its crimes against humanity, has begun to isolate itself. As defenders of justice and conscience, we are stronger today than we were yesterday. The Palestinian cause is much more well known today than it was yesterday. The voices of concerned citizens are troubling Israel even more today than yesterday. Look, is there anyone outside of a handful of countries standing with Israel anymore? Those who ignored our advocacy for a two-state solution now support us. Those who perpetrated so many massacres, genocides, and human rights violations will be held accountable before both the law and history.
He underscored Turkey's commitment to Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity, while opposing any attempts to bolster terrorist organizations in the region.
I have previously stated that Israeli aggression will not be limited to Palestine and will also have repercussions in our region. We have witnessed Israel's reckless attacks in Iran, Lebanon, Yemen, and Syria. In Syria, we have witnessed both actual Israeli attacks and attempts to undermine Syria's efforts for peace and stability. We are developing cooperation projects with Syria in every field and always prioritize Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Terrorist organizations have no place in Syria's future, and cannot have any. The international community must also take steps to ensure peace and stability in Syria. We must refrain from activities that encourage terrorist organizations in the region.
The Turkish leader also reaffirmed Turkey's commitment to peace-oriented foreign policy, highlighting ongoing efforts to develop strategic roadmaps.
First and foremost, our foreign policy is based on peace. We are building peace-oriented roadmaps and taking steps accordingly. Our minds and policies on the Cyprus issue are clear. The federation issue is now closed for us. No one can draw us back into federation discussions with wordplay. Turkish Cypriots will never accept being a minority on the island. The only realistic solution is to accept the existence of two separate states on the island.
Welcome back to the program. Anews editor Mustafa Kochakanar, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Juan.
Mustafa, let's discuss the statements made by Turkish President Erdoğan on his return flight from the United States to Ankara. Mustafa, there's so many things to discuss today, actually. Firstly, I want to start with the relationship between Turkey and the United States. Now, obviously, we saw how that meeting went at the White House. Turkish President Erdoğan and Trump discussing so many different things, taking questions from journalists as well, open-ended questions. Now, Mustafa, how are you looking at this meeting? Do you think that this is going to, because obviously it's the second meeting now that Erdoğan went to the United States, and it was a second meeting with Trump. Obviously, the first one came in 2019. Now, how are you looking at this meeting, Mustafa? Let's start with that first.
But in terms of diplomacy, last week it was very busy for Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. As you know, he went to the United States to participate in the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. And on Tuesday, President Erdoğan addressed world leaders at the United Nations General Assembly. He praised Turkey's diplomatic efforts to ensure international peace and security. He also criticized United Nations Security Council structure, reiterating Turkey's motto that the world is bigger than five and a fairer world is possible. He also met with several world leaders, including UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, French President Emmanuel Macron, and Syrian leader Ahmed al-Shara on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. And he went to the Washington, D.C. on Thursday to meet with his American counterpart Donald Trump at the White House. And on Friday, President Erdoğan spoke to journalists, and he called his meeting with Trump productive in terms of strengthening bilateral cooperation between Turkey and the United States. But we know that there are many issues poisoning the bilateral ties between two important NATO allies. And Erdoğan and Trump exchanged views on the F-16 fighter jets, F-35 stealth fighter jets program, and trade relationships between Ankara and Washington. They also discussed latest geopolitical developments in the Middle East. As you know, on Tuesday, President Erdoğan also joined US President Donald Trump and other Muslim leaders to discuss the latest developments about Israel's deadly military campaign in the occupied Palestinian territory, Gaza Strip. And President Erdoğan reiterated that there should be a two-state solution to the decades-old Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But on the other hand, I think we have to talk about the bilateral ties between Turkey and the United States, because during his first administration, Trump excluded Turkey from F-35 stealth fighter jets program and imposed sanctions on Turkey under the CAATSA. And CAATSA means that countering American adversaries through sanctions act. And it is clearly showing that during his first administration, Trump considered Turkey as one of the United States adversaries. And right now, there are still ongoing discussions to deal with the bilateral disputes between Turkey and the United States over F-35 stealth fighter jets program, because we know that Turkey was one of the most important contributors to F-35 stealth fighter jets program. And Turkey has been always expecting some concrete steps from the United States to cope with security issues between two important NATO allies. And last week, Trump also praised his bilateral relationships with Erdoğan. And I think that after this meeting, Turkish and American decision makers will find a common solution to enhance the security cooperation between Turkey and the United States in terms of ensuring NATO's southeastern flank.
Mustafa, excuse me. Over the course of this year, we've seen Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan regularly meeting with his American counterpart, Marco Rubio, and they have discussed this issue before as well. F-16 modernization kits, F-35 jets, and then CAATSA sanctions as well. We haven't seen any progress, to be fair. Do you think that Trump is deliberately delaying this process? And do you think that this could be delayed further, despite having spoken with the Turkish president?
Well, I can clearly say that Turkey and the United States have ups and downs in their bilateral relationships in the context of historical process. Yes, you mentioned right now there are discussions between Turkish and American foreign policy makers to deal with F-35 stealth fighter jets issues. As you know, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan regularly met with his American counterpart Marco Rubio to discuss the bilateral or multilateral security cooperation and issues between two important NATO allies. We know that during the Obama administration, Turkey was looking for Patriot missile defense systems from its Western allies within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But except Spain, no one gave Patriots to Turkey to increase its air defense capability. And Turkey looked for another option to increase its air defense capabilities. And Turkey acquired Russia's advanced S-400 air defense systems. And following this step, as we mentioned, the United States both excluded Turkey from F-35 stealth fighter jets program and imposed sanctions on Turkey. And as we are talking about that, there are still ongoing discussions between Turkish and American decision makers to cope with bilateral problems between Turkey and the United States. But I think that the United States will be supposed to take concrete steps in terms of strengthening defense cooperation between Ankara and Washington. Yes, Trump is always praising his bilateral relationships with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. He is regularly calling Erdoğan a tough leader and strong president, but on the ground, we have to see some tangible steps from the Trump administration to sell F-35 stealth fighter jets to Turkey and to modernize Turkey's F-16 fighter jets.
Mustafa, coming back to what you mentioned earlier, Erdoğan pressed for the two-state solution again at the United Nations General Assembly. Now, let me read his exact words that what he told reporters on his way back. Our fundamental goal is to end the massacres in Gaza as soon as possible. Security reasons cannot justify the loss of life of children, women, and innocent civilians. Now, Mustafa, tell me about the plans for Gaza. What can we expect here?
Well, you know, Turkey has been always advocating for a Palestinian state based on 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. And I think that Turkey's diplomatic steps are yielding positive results in terms of recognizing the Palestinian statehood, because last week on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly, many Western countries, including France, recognized the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people living in the occupied territories. But right now, yes, everyone is talking about a two-state solution to the decades-old Palestinian-Israel conflict, but no one is talking about Palestinian sovereignty or borders between Palestine and Israel or Palestine's army situation, because if we are talking about a state, we have to clarify the borders of the state and sovereignty for that borders. Right now, yes, everyone is recognizing Palestinian statehood, but no one is taking concrete steps in terms of bringing long-standing peace and stability to the Middle East. Many Western countries are still hesitating to call what is happening in Gaza as a genocide. Yes, they are criticizing Israel's military actions in the region, but they are still supplying arms support for Israel's so-called national security demands in the region. Today, Israel's embattled Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump at White House. Right now, they are talking about a ceasefire proposal by the Trump administration. We will see what happens tomorrow, but I don't think that United States right now is eager to take tangible steps to convince the Israeli decision makers of returning to the negotiating table to strike a new ceasefire deal with Hamas, because Trump administration is always reiterating United States ironclad and unwavering support for Israel's so-called national security in the Middle East. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is always reiterating United States' strong support for Israel. I think that last week President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, during his bilateral meeting with Trump, brought to dire humanitarian situation in Gaza to the agenda. I hope that Erdoğan can be able to convince the Trump administration of pressuring Israel to strike a new ceasefire deal or to halt its military campaign in the region. But based on the facts on the ground right now, I don't think that there will be a ceasefire in Gaza for foreseeable future.
Mustafa, Erdoğan also said that, Israel's aggression is not just limited to the occupied Palestinian territories. Israel has been attacking Lebanon, Iran, Yemen, and also Syria. And the Syrian president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, he was also present at the 80th UN General Assembly. How are you looking at his speech, Mustafa? Do you think that his presence and his address was historic?
Mar, for months we have been doing this program when we have been always saying that Israel is pursuing expansionist geopolitical agenda in the region, because Israel is not only targeting Palestinians living in the occupied territories, Israeli military forces, but also taking aim at other countries' political sovereignty and territorial integrity. As you mentioned, Israel is also targeting Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Iran, and recently Qatar. And it is clearly showing that Israeli decision makers have been striving for making Israel the only regional hegemon in the Middle East. And Turkey has been always accusing Israel of endangering peace and stability in the Middle East. And last week, on the sidelines of the UNGA, Turkish President Erdoğan met with his Syrian counterpart Ahmed al-Sharaa in the Turkish House in New York. And Turkish and Syrian decision makers discussed all aspects of bilateral ties between Syria and Turkey, exchanging views on the latest security challenges in the Middle East. Right now, we have to talk about two important threats for Syria's political future. One threat is internal one, and the second one is external one. If we have to talk about the internal one, we have to, I think, mention about the PKK terror groups, Syrian offshoot PYD, YPG, because PYD, YPG dominated SDF is still active in northern part of the country, and PYD, YPG is posing a huge threat to Syria's unitary structure, political stability, economic prosperity, national security, and territorial integrity. We know that Turkey conducted several cross-border operations to eliminate the PYD, YPG terror threat in the region. Right now, I think that Turkish military forces have been meticulously following the latest developments in the region. But if PYD, YPG tries to establish any separate political structure in northern Syria, I don't think that Turkey will allow any fait accompli in the region. And if we have to talk about external threat, I think we have to mention about the Israeli threat, because Israel is regularly targeting Syria's military infrastructure, and Turkey's rising geopolitical influence in Syria, I think, is testing Israel's patience. We know that Netanyahu is always asking Trump to make pressure on Turkey about its geopolitical influence in the region. But on the contrary to expectation of Trump publicly sided with Turkey and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, and Trump is always calling upon Netanyahu to be reasonable if Israel wants to deal with its security problems with Turkey in the Middle East. I think that Turkish decision makers reiterate at every opportunity that Turkey doesn't want any military confrontation with Israel over Syria, but I don't think that Turkey will sit idle if Israel escalates its military aggression in Syria.
Mustafa, last but not the least, another key issue for Turkey is the TRNC, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Now, Erdoğan has also proposed, the existence of two states, like he said, for Palestine, that Israelis and Palestinians should have a two-state solution. He has said the same thing for the Cyprus island, that Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots should be living in peace and harmony. Now, Mustafa, he has also said, the Turkish president has clearly stated that the issue of the federation does no longer exist for us. Tell me more about that, Mustafa.
Umar, as you know, Turkey and the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus have been enjoying close relationships in many fields, ranging from politics and economy to military and trade. And Turkey has been always pushing for a two-state solution to the so-called Cyprus dispute. And Turkey is always advocating for two-state solution on the island. But on the other hand, we know that Greece and Greek Cypriot administration have been always pursuing a maximalist approach to the issue, and Turkey is always accusing both Greece and Greek Cypriot administration of threatening peace and security on the island. And as you know, Turkish Cypriot President Ersin Tatar was also in the United States to explain the Turkish Cypriots' legitimate rights to the world public opinion. And he also met with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on the sidelines of the UNGA. He is always claiming that right now there are two separate nations living on the island, and one nation is Turkish Cypriot and other nation is Greek Cypriots. And both Turkey and Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus have been always calling for two-state solution. But unfortunately, right now, no one except Turkey is recognizing the legitimate rights of the Turkish Cypriot people living on the island. I hope that international community will find a common way or common sense to take Turkey's security demands into the consideration, because right now, yes, Greek and Greece and Greek Cypriot administration, they are always talking about federalism for Cyprus' political future. But in the historical process, we saw that federalism didn't bring peace and stability to the region. I think that Turkey and Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus will realize the two-state solution to the Cyprus issue.
Musa, what sort of concerns has the Greek government raised when it comes to Turkey's proposals?
Umar, you know, there are huge amount of natural resources located in the eastern Mediterranean, and Turkey has been always calling for fair sharing among regional stakeholders for these natural resources in the eastern Mediterranean. But as we mentioned, Greece and Greek Cypriot administration have been always pursuing for a maximalist approach. We know that Turkey made a maritime deal with Libya in 2019, and it totally changed the geopolitical landscape in the region, and Turkey's rising geopolitical influence in the eastern Mediterranean. Personally, I think that is pushing both Greece and Greek Cypriot administration's buttons. That is the reason why they are against a two-state solution in the region, because they don't want to share the natural resources with the Turkish Cypriot people living on the island. But I think that Turkish Cypriot people deserve to live in peace and dignity in their homeland.
Musa, thanks for that analysis. I'll be right back with you.
Thank you.
Hamas said on Sunday that it had lost contact with 2 Israeli hostages held in Gaza City, blaming ongoing Israeli bombardments and calling for a 24-hour suspension of military operations to retrieve them.
Israeli artillery lobbed shells and tanks moved deeper into Gaza City on Sunday, where local health authorities said they have been unable to respond to desperate calls from residents in targeted areas. Israeli forces are closing in on western parts of Gaza City, where hundreds of thousands of people are sheltering. Hundreds of thousands more have fled south, urged by Israel to seek shelter ahead of the assault. Many have been forced to live in tents, and some without even that. Saida Auni Abu Hatab told Reuters, quote, "It is really such a difficult suffering. Where would we go, people? Maybe we are thrown in the street. There are no tents or anything for us. Maybe in the street, only God knows." The Civil Emergency Service in Gaza said late on Saturday that Israel had denied 73 requests sent via international organizations to rescue injured Palestinians in Gaza City. Israeli authorities had no immediate comment. The Israeli military launched its long-threatened ground offensive on Gaza City on September 16th, and it continues to bombard other spots in the enclave. In Nuseirat, south of Gaza City, mourners laid to rest Palestinians killed in Israeli strikes overnight. Abu Ammar Khudier said, "The child, the elder, the woman, they are all targets. There is no safe place. We left Gaza to reach a safe humanitarian zone, but there is no safety." Israel has pledged to free the captives and eradicate Hamas. Its assault on Gaza has killed nearly 65,000 people, reduced nearly the entire enclave to rubble, and sparked accusations of genocide, which Israel denies. Relatives of the Israeli hostages on Saturday accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of sabotaging efforts to negotiate the release of the captives. They warned that Netanyahu has instead chosen to bomb the captives to death. The military wing of Hamas said on Sunday that it had lost contact with 2 Israeli hostages held in Gaza City and called on Israel to pull back its troops and suspend airstrikes for 24 hours so they could be retrieved. The fate of the 2 hostages could cast a shadow over a meeting between Netanyahu and U.S. President Donald Trump set for Monday. Ahead of that meeting, Trump wrote on social media that there was a chance for what he called, quote, greatness in the Middle East, without elaborating. The U.S. last week released a 21-point Middle East peace plan to end the nearly 2-year-long war. A Hamas representative said on Saturday that the group had not seen the U.S. plan.
Welcome back to the program. Joining us now from the Pakistani capital is political analyst Javed Rana. Javed, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Umar.
Javed, I want to start by just asking you about the 21-point plan that President Trump has apparently floated to Arab and Islamic leaders. Now, tell me more about that, Javed. Do you think that this plan is going to be accepted by these states or even by Hamas?
I think for the Arab states and for the Muslim states, by and large, they don't have a problem. I can't say about Turkey because Turkey has been pursuing very independent policy on Gaza. But I think the bigger issue here is what is the plan and how that is going to be executed and how that is going to be perceived and by the Palestinian. That is a bigger challenge. But I think to begin with, let's just explore what that plan is in the larger context. That plans include essentially Muslims and Arab countries are being taking over Gaza. And then who's going to head it? Now there are wild speculations and that Tony Blair, the former British Prime Minister, is going to head that administration. I think if that is the case, this is going to spark a lot of resentment among Palestinians. And I think this would be a counterproductive. But again, the bigger problem is that, yes, this plan also include the return of all captives along with those who have already been killed by none other than by the Israeli military. So again, these are just general contours of these plans. And again, the emphasis is also there on the reconstruction. And guess from where this money is going to come out. Not from apartheid Israel, which is responsible for the destruction of the entire infrastructure. It is going to be coming from the Muslim countries, more particularly from the Arab countries. So the bigger question is, Israel is destroying the civil infrastructure, not the military infrastructure, civil infrastructure of Gaza. And who's going to bear the burn? Financially, who's going to compensate it? Muslims, the Arab countries. This is again ununderstandable. But since Americans know that Arab Nash have a lot of money, they don't have a problem to fund any reconstruction, so they are also willing. And I think Pakistan's Prime Minister also sounded very jubilant in his recent press conference when he said that this plan is going to work. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif was also part of the meeting, along with the Arab and Muslim leaders with Donald Trump. And I think Donald Trump shared all those details. Now, again, Donald Trump is making a tall claim that this ceasefire agreement is going to be there very soon. But we have to see everything with a pinch of salt. Going by the track record, Donald Trump has been shifting from one particular narrative to another narrative. He's been changing his stance. And all of his previous positions, all of his previous initiatives to bring an end to this genocide have met with their defiance in Tel Aviv. Netanyahu is simply not listening to anyone. Donald Trump was pursuing a ceasefire agreement, and we have seen that in Doha there was an attack on Hamas leadership. And in a similar fashion,
Javed, Trump has said to all the leaders, sorry for interrupting you, Trump has said that he has not approved Israel's plans to annex the West Bank. You're saying that Netanyahu and Trump could have problems, but do you think that he will allow, like Netanyahu would agree to Trump's demands of not annexing the West Bank? Because the UAE also says that that's a red line. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, let's be very frank, there is no red line that UAE can impose on Israel or can impose on USA. UAE has been partner in the crime. Before I come to your specific question, let me also recall here that the US businessmen have been purchasing lands in the East Jerusalem and selling it to the extremist Jews. And this is the UAE's Red Crescent, which has been spying against all these resistant groups in Gaza to Mossad. So UAE is a red line. Let's forget about it. It has no value. But again, the bigger question is, what does it really mean when Israel says that it is likely to annex the occupied West Bank? And what does it really mean when Donald Trump says that he would not let that happen? Let's see what is happening on the ground. There are 2,000 housing units which are being constructed in occupied West Bank. Jenin has almost been taken over by Israel. Jenin is a part of the West. 50,000, at least 50,000 Palestinians from the occupied West Bank have been forced to leave from their homes. Their homes are being destroyed every next day. Hundreds of people, nearly 1,000, probably more than 1,000, have been arrested alone from the occupied West Bank. Their agriculture infrastructure and their agricultural land is being taken over by the settlers, illegal settlers, with the support of Israel's military. Now, let's say Donald Trump is what he says, we believe in him, supposedly, for the sake of the argument, that he would not allow the annexation of West Bank. That means that there may not be any formal annexation of the West Bank, but for all practical reasons, West Bank has already been taken over and it has already been annexed by all practical means. De facto reality is that the West Bank is not under the control of the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian Authority have launched many operations against the resistance groups inside West Bank on the behalf of the apartheid state. So again, all these remarks which coming from the White House, we have to see them with a pinch of salt, because it is the same Donald Trump who have been saying time and again that all these Palestinians from Gaza would be expelled, and there will be a huge infrastructure, new infrastructure, and there will be new settlements. We should not forget that Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of the Donald Trump, has already chalked out the plan for the settlements in Gaza. We should not forget that Israel has been saying time and again that everybody from the Gaza would be expelled, the population would be shifted to somewhere else, maybe in the African countries or elsewhere. So right now, we should not forget that Israel every day is destroying more than 150 buildings every day, both residential infrastructure and both commercial infrastructure. Israel is wiping out all means of living in Gaza. And yet, we cannot see this plan to be implemented anytime soon. Unless we see it on the ground happening, we should not trust Donald Trump. And I think, with few exceptions of Turkey and Iran, we should not trust any Muslim leader, because most of them, Either they are compromised or they are so scared of Israel that if they speak up, they would be the next, they would be attacked.
Javed, talking about Iran, the United Nations has reimposed sanctions on Tehran. How is the Iranian government reacting to that?
I think the Iranian government has seriously reacted, and they are saying they are not going to give in to their demands. And more particularly, why would Iran give in to Western demands at a time when apparently they have left no stone unturned to destroy their nuclear infrastructure? Whatever they could have done, they have already done. Now, Iran has already basically taken away the enriched material to elsewhere. Right now, as we speak, West is essentially through various means, through IE and other organizations, they are after that enriched material, which they suspect could be used to make a nuclear bomb. Now, I think West has come to know that they cannot have a successful regime change operation in Tehran anytime soon in Iran. So that is why we have seen now that they have built up more and more pressure. That is why we have seen that they have now reimposed these one of the worst economic sanctions on Tehran, which are crippling sanctions. But at the same time, I think we should also look at the bigger reality, and the bigger reality is that Iran has managed to establish an alternative regional system, economic system, where it has been smuggling out its oil to India, where it has been smuggling out oil to Pakistan, I mean, through various means, and it is running its economy. And then again, I don't foresee that the China or Russia are going to implement all these international global sanctions of UN Security Council against Tehran. This is a new situation. The new situation is that there is no international order. UN Security Council's resolutions since have met with defiance when it comes to Israel. There is a culture of impunity. Therefore, I think now there are regional blocs who are trying to have their own economic system, who are watching their political interest through China, through Russia. Therefore, I think these sanctions, yes, they are crippling, as it looks like, but I don't think that it will be, the West would be able to force Iran to basically come to a negotiating tables on the terms and conditions of Europe, USA, and Israel.
Javed, just before I let you go, I also want to ask you about the Global Summit Flotilla, which is on its way to the occupied Gaza Strip to deliver humanitarian aid and basic necessities. Now, it's near Greece, according to the latest reports. What sort of a reaction could we expect from Israel once it approaches the occupied Gaza Strip?
Well, I think if it approaches before the ceasefire agreement or any peace plan, then the possibility, going by the track record, has always been that Israel is going to detain all of these human rights activists. All these boats are going to be taken over by Israel's brutal military. That has been the track record. My understanding is that they are not going to assassinate these political activists, these human rights activists. Reason being is that this will cause a lot of international backlash at a time when Israel already feels isolated globally. So but this is at the same time, we should not forget that more than a dozen drone attacks have already taken place on their way to Gaza at different locations, at different port locations where they had parked their boats. They came under attack. It looks like that Israel is trying to intimidate them, trying to scare them away. But I think these bold political activists drawn from almost all over the world, they are there, they are determined to reach there, and that is a kind of a wake-up call to the sleeping partners in the region. And my indications are obviously these are not. There could have been a better initiative on their part. There could have been an economic blockade of Israel. I think the situation would have been very different. Now, the situation has reached to a tipping point where the common people, these human rights activists, I think they are representing the common people. The sentiments of the global global sentiments of common people, and that is why they are daring to Israel. Despite the fact they know it, they are going to be detained. Despite the fact the threat of their assassination is there. Nonetheless, they are fast heading towards Gaza, and that is something indeed an extraordinary. At a time when the global opinion has hugely shifted in favor of Palestinians, has hugely turned against the apartheid Israel, I think this initiative is something which must be acknowledged, which must be appreciated across the globe.
Political analyst Javed Rana, thank you so much for joining the program today. It was a valuable insight. Thank you so much for that analysis. Anews editor Mustafa Kocakinar, thank you so much for being with us in this studio.
Thank you, Mark.
That brings us to the end of our program. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.